Hi, I'm Julie Ross,
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
and you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
And look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging to say the least. But with a few skills under our belts, we just might be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Parenting Horizons podcast. As always, it is I, Greg Abbey, here with Julie. Julie, how you doing?
I'm doing okay, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's great to see you. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about neurodivergent parenting, which is something we've talked a little bit about before on the podcast. And we're lucky today to have a great guest. Her name is Rebecca Vitsmun. Rebecca is an autistic author from Lafayette, Louisiana, living with something called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which she can explain to us what that is. Now she lives in Tacoma, Washington with her spouse and 5 children, and she's written a book called Eliza D's Universes. And I think it's about, I know Julie read it, it's about invisible disabilities, maybe. We'll talk about the book today. We'll talk about neurodivergent parenting. Rebecca, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So before we dive into the conversation, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, and maybe how did you evolve to wanting to read or write this book?
Yeah, sure. So, in college, I started off as a math major, but along the way, even my English teachers would be like, "You're an English major, though, right?" And I'm like, "No, I'm a math major." And she's like, "No, you're an English major." And I was like, "I'm literally declared in math." And she's like, "Yeah, you're English, though." And
You gotta
it turns out
you
she
gotta
was
follow that sometimes. You gotta keep her pushing that.
Well,
It's
she
like,
was right. By the end of college, I had switched my major, not to English, but to humanities, which was writing. And people would ask me like, "Oh, what are you going to do with that?" And I was like, "Well, I'm going to write." And they're like, "Haha, sure." And I was like, I was young and I was like, but I am. But over time, I was a nanny and I was a math tutor, as like kind of my jobs before I became a stay-at-home mom. And I've been rocking the stay-at-home mom life for a significant period of time since 2011.
wow.
Wow.
Right. So, but along the way, I married someone who had 3 kids. That's my 3 stepchildren out of the 5. And I was sitting on the couch with my 14-year-old stepdaughter talking about college because she's 14. We're talking about college. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I have a degree. It's in like humanities, which is writing." And she's like, "Oh, I've never read anything you've written." I was like, "Oh, no. Oh, no." I've
It's
failed
time.
as like... Right. I'm a failed writer. I'm a failed parent. Like, how could I have let this happen? And so I was like, well, you know what? I'll write something for y'all. Yeah, I'll write something that all y'all can read. And so I set off to write a book for my kids. It wasn't even a book. It was just something my kids could read because I did check with her. I was like, "You don't want to read like a paper on collectivism versus individualism, right?" And she's like, No, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, the 14-year-olds. Yeah, I don't think that's the audience for that.
Nah,
topic,
it wasn't
for sure.
even a real pitch, to be honest. Right? It's like, "You want to read that? Yeah." Like, it's no. So I set off to do that, but after I had finished, I was like excited about what I had written, and I was like, I really think I could do more with this than just right. I was just like, okay, so I got an editor from Reedsy. And I bought a book that was like the marketing of 2020 or, to see like, what do you do when you have maybe a book?
Right.
And I found a publisher who accepted my work, and then from there I started working with an illustrator because the book is very specific, right? It's covering invisible disabilities, and so you can't just hand it off with like no knowledge. So I worked hand in hand to get what it should look like through this amazing illustrator's art style, and that's how we got to where we are.
And
I set out to finally use my
good,
degree
that's
to
great.
write something for my kids.
She gave you the boost. Why and well, first of all, can you how do you define what's an invisible disability and why did you want to make the book about that?
Well, so invisible disabilities are is simply that, like, they're honestly, that's kind of a misnomer because they're not invisible, they're
Right.
hidden. Like, people, when they look at you, they think this is a normal person who has normal capabilities, and right, and that is not what is happening. Instead, there's stuff that's going on inside of your body that can't be seen, that's limiting you in ways that people can't understand unless you say, "Hey, I can't do that." And so sometimes, though, people will, if you say, "Hey, I can't do that," they're like, "Oh, you can. All you have to do is XYZ." And it's like, you don't understand. I can't XYZ
Right.
also.
Hmm.
Right.
And so for me, the disabilities that are in the book are the ones that I have. I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but what comes with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome are other types of disabilities that get affected because this is a connective tissue disorder. Connective tissue is used throughout your body. It surrounds your organs. Your eyes are 80% connective tissue. Your skin is connective tissue. It's a multisystemic condition that affects your musculoskeletal formation. Right now, they think it also affects brain development. They're kind of pitching in the science world that maybe, there's this subtype of autism that's related to connective tissue disorders because they think that the connective tissue affects how your brain develops. And so there's all these different things that are going on. But if you were to look at me, you're like, that's an able body until you
Right.
see that
Right.
like the way that my joints work is not good. And I also injure myself very frequently. Like a couple of years ago, I must have had 15 injuries
Oh
that
my God.
year. Just
Wow.
slipped
Wow.
ribs and sublux shoulders. And sometimes my knee dislocates or my ankle rolls very easily. And I need all these different types of like devices to keep myself together or to heal, and it's always something new and I never see it coming, right? I could roll over
Mm.
in bed and sublux a rib, and then in the morning, like, I had all the plans for the day and I have 5 kids,
Wow.
right? And then suddenly I can't move without, right? I can't even exist without pain when I have a rib out. So, right, it's just very
Wow.
debilitating, but half the time I look normal and then I'm just a fraction of a second away from getting injured. And so the book covers a child who has the conditions that I do, including my comorbid conditions, which were postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. That's POTS. Essentially, what POTS is the connective tissue in my legs doesn't squeeze the blood back up to my brain.
Hmm.
So when I'm standing, postural orthostatic means not moving. So I'm standing, all of the blood starts to pool in my legs and it won't go up to my brain. So my heart starts to pump very, very quickly and I could just pass out. So I
Right.
either have to keep moving, I need compression socks. There's different things that have to happen here. The way that I sit leads to compression on my legs to make sure that the blood doesn't pool there. And then another condition, and how I show that in the book is in the positions in which the child sits in, because she sits in the typical EDS POTS configurations, right? It's like it's there, you can see it, but
Right.
had I not told people that this child in the book was had these conditions, people would just, this is a normal kid.
Sure.
Hmm.
And then the last one is mast cell activation syndrome. It's kind of like a severe kind of allergic reaction, but there's like, you have gut reactions, skin reactions, nasal right? There's a,
Sure.
and then one can set off the others too. And so because your body just overreacts to everything, I think it's a connective tissue thing too. It just sends the message just so, like, there's something not holding it back. So it just flourishes through the body very quickly, which can be very debilitating.
So this seems it's like you said, it's specific to the conditions you had. Did some of this come out of you as a child having this not recognized? And is that what this is about a little bit, is how as parents you can kind of look for that? So cuz how do you spot an individual sorry, how do you spot an invisible disability? And was that part of you writing this book? Like, was this something as you were growing up in middle school and high school that people didn't understand, or was it diagnosed?
I did not know. I thought I was a normal kid. I could tell that things were weird. I could bend myself. I could take off my glasses with my feet from behind. My legs would come around my head, take my glasses, and take them off. I was a
Oh my
natural
god.
contortionist. Anytime there was a yoga class, people would be like, wow, right? Because I was more flexible than the yoga teacher, even though I'd never done yoga before, right?
Right.
So there's all these something's going on here, but I was just like, it's within the realm of normal. Like my brain just said, like, I'm still normal. Right. And then,
Yeah, of
but
course, but
every day
did you have social emotional stuff connected to that, like, within school, or did you feel like so you never felt different, or did you?
I could tell that I was different and I would be treated as though I was different. But my perception of myself was that something must be wrong with them to not realize that I'm normal.
Right, right.
I'm just walking through life and I'm like, I'm not trying to do anything differently. I just am. And so I'd be excluded from groups, or maybe I was chosen last
Right.
to be on like the dodgeball team. Like people could tell that like I wasn't as good at moving my body, or when I was in ballet, I kept being held back. Where I'd see other kids moving forward, and I'd be like, "Why am I 11 years old with the 8-year-olds? Why aren't what's going on that they keep putting me with the 8-year-olds? I think I'm trying. I
Sure.
think I'm trying really hard."
And was this
um,
something you would talk to your parents about? Were you getting support from home? Were you getting support from the school? Did you go into counseling?
No, nothing.
Mm,
I had no support. Like, I didn't. I'm not even sure how aware my parents were. They were at times they were frustrated because it'd be like I'm autistic, right? But I
mhm.
wasn't diagnosed. Many women get diagnosed in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s because it looks different in women than it does, or in girls than it does in boys. Like I was hyperverbal instead of right,
Mm,
nonverbal, or
mhm.
there was ways in which I could interact with people. I'm hyper empathetic instead of, like the opposite, or I'm hyperphantasic instead of aphantasic. Like there's a lot
What
going
is
on where my parents.
I'm sorry, Rebecca, for interrupt. What does hyperphantasic mean?
There's a pretty simple test for this. So, like, let's say that you're picturing an apple, and is the apple on a table? What does the table look like? What color is the apple? If you zoom in, does it have like imperfections on the apple? If you cut it, do you see it glistening? And like, does it have any details? A hyperphantasic person can not only give you all those details, they can zoom in and out like as much and interact with whatever is inside of their imagination. Where aphantasic, there's no picture whatsoever. And most people just end up in the middle somewhere.
Okay.
But for me, I can zoom in to the protons and then be like, there's
Mm.
universes inside of this proton, and I can describe them, and I know it's my imagination, but it's very detailed. Or I can, zoom out outside of the universe and be like, there's a kingdom, right? Like inside of my book, Eliza D's Universes goes over the ability to see and create these universes in a hyperphantasic person.
Wow. How
Mhm,
and
mhm.
so and maybe you both can speak to this, like, Julie, how you've seen this in your practice. So, Rebecca, how does a parent you know, spot something, not even specific to you, but if we're talking about disabilities in general, autism is such a wide spectrum. It seems like the book is a celebration of these differences, but as a parent, um, is there a way to spot invisibility and invisible disabilities?
Yeah, and what I would say is if my parents could do it over again with like all the knowledge that we have now, um, I got punished a lot for things that ended up being disabilities. Like,
Yeah.
Hmm.
why am I ruining the 4th of July fireworks? right? Because I'd just be screaming and crying and holding my ears like an autistic child would. But a lot of times, what ends up being categorized as misbehavior is an invisible disability. Sometimes that kid who's like making that noise and it's so annoying and it's over and over and over again, maybe they have ADHD. I think at this point, the assumption can be made that most children are not misbehaving. And if they
Right.
are, it's because they
Right.
need support.
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, Julia, I want you to speak that too. I mean, I have a child who's now 23. I mean, it hasn't been that long. You're right. I think the information is gathered because he did have undiagnosed ADHD, so he was constantly calling out in class, getting in trouble, and then it's this cycle of because he's getting in trouble, it's affecting his self-esteem, but he can't help himself. Um, I don't know, Julie, do you how do you know when to tell parents when because all children obviously have behavioral stuff they go through as they grow up. Have you had instances like how do you know when it's time to perhaps see a specialist or a counselor or get some help or support around that? You both can speak to that, but Julie, what would you say?
Well, I had a set kind of separate thought, tangential thought when Rebecca was talking, which is that um, a lot of the parents that I work with, I mean, parents who have an easy road with their kid, they don't come to me. Why would they come to me? I'm a parenting expert, but I'm here to help with the stuff that's difficult, right? Not the stuff that's easy. And I find that a surprising number of parents are often adverse to get a diagnosis for their kid. And I understand that on one hand, but this is a these are situations, these hidden disabilities, I think, are situations where you do need the label because it brings it out into the light and allows you to parent to the unique child that you have, as opposed to assuming your child is, neurotypical, which and then behaving in ways that you would with a neurotypical child instead of saying, "Hey, my kid's covering their ears for a reason and screaming for a reason. They're probably experiencing the fireworks in Rebecca's case as more intense than the rest of us." Right? Because if you don't have that label, if you don't say, "Oh, I understand how my child, this individual is experiencing this," then a parent is likely to go to discipline, because it's behavior as opposed to survival, really.
Mhm.
So here's what I tell parents who come to me. I say, first, because there's a lot of different things that can play into behaviors the kids have, not the least of which is the behaviors the parents have. So there's a family dynamic. I come at all of this from kind of a family systems model, which is that everybody's playing a part in the dynamic in the family. So I work with parents to change the dynamic, to change their part of the dynamic first. So I'm not going to say, "Oh, I think you need to get your child diagnosed right off the bat," but I'm going to work with the parents and give them techniques that I know work with neurotypical kids. And if the techniques don't work, then I say, and they're never harsh or, Greg, my techniques
Yeah,
are very warm and empathetic and non-judgmental and loving. Um, but if they don't work, if we're not seeing a change in behaviors, then I say, well, let's get a snapshot of this kid. Let's get an x-ray and see, like, what's going on. What
mhm,
might be standing in the way. And when we find out if there is a label, when we find out that the child's on the spectrum or the child has ADHD or the child has, OCD, or, as Rebecca has stated, there are many, many, many hidden disabilities. If a child has that, then we switch the parenting techniques. It's not that there's no parenting techniques,
right.
it's that we need just a slightly different set of
Sure.
techniques.
Rebecca, you were nodding a lot while Julie was talking. I'd love to hear what thoughts were coming to you as she was saying all of that.
Yeah, well, and what'll end up happening too is a lot of the techniques for one kind of person won't work for another person. Like what ended up happening for me, I would go to physical therapy and get injured
Mhm.
because I had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I'm in there for, a dislocated knee, but my shoulder is acting up from the stuff they have me doing for my knee because they want me to strengthen my core, right? Well, while I'm trying to strengthen my core, something happens with my shoulder, but they can't do anything about it because they were like, oh, right. I'm not
Mhm.
in there for my shoulder. And the way insurance works is because I'm only in there for my knee, they have to do knee things.
Right.
And so they try to work with me, but then that's another doctor's appointment. But by the time that I get seen by the doctor and referred to PT again for the second time, my shoulder's fine and I don't need help anymore. So getting the diagnosis for me meant unlocking that door in physical therapy because now they can treat my entire body anytime. Right? I'm
Mhm.
I'm doing something for my knee and my shoulder goes out. Okay, we're going to work on your knee and your shoulder now. Okay. And then something happens with my rib. Okay, we're going to do that right now. And there's no delay in getting me the services that I need. And so getting the diagnosis unlocks this door to all these resources that are behind the wall.
Mhm.
And so I understand that it's scary to get a diagnosis. And I've seen where parents are like, no, my kid's normal. I want it. And I think it's a stage of grief
Yes, I
because the
agree.
grief stages, you have the bargaining and, the denial. And I feel like that comes frequently from a parent who, they had their baby and their baby's perfect. And,
Yeah.
and
Right.
to think that that baby needs specialized services is a scary thought. But on the other side of that is wellness and way like a better life than the one that you were living whenever it was a struggle. And so,
Mhm.
yeah.
I'm curious, Rebecca, because a lot of disabilities are hidden. How do our listeners practice allyship? How do they, what specific things can they do, or ways, in what specific ways can they act or put themselves out there to be allies to people who may not even they themselves know that they have a disability?
Yeah, and that's a big one because what ends up happening frequently in our cultural narrative is as soon as somebody is labeled as different, different could potentially be dangerous. And
Mhm.
generally in a group setting, before I had my diagnoses, I got othered very frequently, like the
Mm.
last to be chosen for this, or you know, um, labeling people if you don't know what their conditions are as other
Yeah.
places them on the outside of this bubble. And a lot of times, what people are othering these days are disabilities and they're not aware of it. And I feel like spreading the awareness that, hey, most frequently, whenever you have somebody who's like, they're not able to do this, like they're not engaging with you the way that you expected, then what's going to be happening there is a difference.
Mhm.
And what that difference is, like having a lot more leeway on, like, hey, maybe this person actually needs some assistance. Maybe they're not even aware that they're doing this thing that's different. Like, I feel like communication instead of pulling back would be the
Mhm.
best solution for the problem, is sort of like, hey, are you even aware that whenever you do this that's different? Like
Right.
that's a move towards, because often what you have is that's different, pull back, that's different, pull back. And then eventually a lot of my friends that I know that have invisible disabilities have like a long track history of being othered very quickly, because it's just like you set off people's alarms as this is different, and then
Mhm.
they back away very quickly instead of leaning in and being like, this is different, how can we incorporate those differences into our group? Because oftentimes, while I'm significantly unable to do some things, that just means that I spend those moments of my life that I wasn't doing that doing something else. and I have a lot to give and a lot of value that could be utilized by any group.
Mhm.
But I have to be included first instead of not included. And at this
Mhm.
point, I can just be like, hey, it's because I'm autistic or because I can't do
Right.
this and I can't do that, but I can do the following. But, you know, I'm 41 and I've spent the last, 8 or 9 years significantly focused on this. But as a child, I still needed to be included. I still needed to be communicated with. Whenever I was falling behind in ballet, somebody needed to go and be like, hey, I think something's going on here because we have an 11-year-old who's been in ballet 5 days a week for the last couple of years and she's still with the 8-year-olds. Like that
Right.
was a flag. Um,
But do you feel
and I'm
like that
sure
was
people would
a
do a little bit more around that now. What?
right, right. I was just gonna ask, so you feel like that was a flag that wasn't recognized. So, yeah, like, how do you so this has obviously made you conscious with your own kids, and how have you seen it? It's definitely different now, but are there ways that it still needs to improve? Like, are there enough things set up in school? And Julie, I would like you to speak to this too. Like, what does a parent literally do if they feel like there's something going on?
Well, I mean, from my point of view, if a parent feels like there's something going on, they need to seek expert advice, to say, here's what I'm seeing, what does the expert who has seen this probably multiple times before, or even not, but what does the expert think? Is this behavior, um is this communication within the realm of neurotypical development? And the other thing that I wanted to say too, though, was that one of the things that I found challenging is that for people who aren't aware of their neurodiversity, either it's gone, undiagnosed, or they've managed to kind of get through. I in my experience, they know that something's different.
Hmm.
They know that the way that they're taking in the world is different, and they might say something, make a comment, communicate about something, and somebody else responds in a very shocked or back off way, and they don't understand why that's happening. And I love, Rebecca, what you said about leaning in and saying, hey, are you aware that this is maybe the responses that you're getting are because, you think differently. And having said that, in my experience, that often starts a shame spiral for people.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a thing that I was going to say too, right? Because whenever you do lean in, right? Like, and you're about to tell somebody, are you aware that you're different? Right? Don't disappear after that moment. Like, if
Right.
anything, it's time to like significantly be like, hey, like let's figure this out. Like, like I'm here for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be here for you. Like,
Hmm.
you're gonna get through this and we're gonna get through it together because I care, right? Instead of like, are you aware you're different? Bye. Like,
Right.
that is not helpful. If anything, it's like, how many people would just be like, you're different, bye. Like, you're different, bye.
Right.
You're different, bye.
Right.
That is traumatic.
Yeah.
And it's on top of already facing the world with your differences, which is difficult because like there's not a roadmap. Um, you
Yeah.
know, and so you're trying to navigate with a body or a brain that doesn't line up with the roadmap that you're being drilled, through. Like, it's like, use your body to do this. Okay, well, my body's not doing that like the way
Right.
that you want it to. I have a memory too of one time somebody was testing me to see if I was capable of doing a task, right? Because they could tell that I was struggling and they're like, okay, well, try this simple thing. And I tried the simple thing and she was like, do, do you think that you did the thing? And I said, yes. And I meant that. I remember thinking I did it. And then she's like, you didn't though. So let's have you do it again. And then like I was supposed to be plie in ballet, and I was just supposed to keep a flat back and go down and go back up, and I
Mhm.
thought that I was. And she's like, "Okay, I'm gonna put my arms on either side of you, if that's okay, and now do it and don't hit my arms." And I remember doing it, and I hit her arm, and I did not expect that. And she's like, "Can you even feel your body at all?" And I remember
Right.
looking at her and just scratching my head, right? I was just that kid who was like, I didn't answer because I didn't know. And the answer was no, I couldn't. And hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome leads to a permanent impairment in proprioception. That's the feeling of where your body is in space. And so I did not know that I couldn't feel my body and where it was in space. But that was the first time that I was like, oh, okay.
Well, it also speaks to what you just talked about is it sounds like in that moment and what we need more of and what Julie and I talk about on this show all the time is attunement. I mean, it sounds like this woman took a moment to really lean into what was going on. And it sounds like, I mean, I'm assuming that because I'm curious about how it shaped your parenting as someone who maybe came into your, it sounds like you said even in the last 10 years that you figured out exactly your diagnosis or your hidden disability, things that maybe you didn't get as a child with this disability. I mean, we all have that. I mean, I look back at my own parents and I'm a parent. Like we all miss things, we're all lacking. I don't blame my parents, but obviously you missed out on things that maybe you wished you had. And I guess I'm curious how, as you figured out your own hidden disability and maybe the things you wished you'd had, that you do with your own children, or that you would say to our audience, the parents listening to this, that might have a neurodivergent child, what are some of the things you now do because of maybe how things were handled when you were growing up?
Yeah, so definitely, I have several neurodivergent children. My stepchildren too. I'm not going to disclose their personal
Sure.
information, but like
Yeah.
definitely um, being able to view it as like, okay, this kid is struggling because they did, like it starts to happen around maybe 8 years old whenever it becomes the most prevalent for whenever your development is, and you could see it before
Mhm.
too. And,
Mhm.
honestly, I look back and I was just like, oh, the signs were there when they were two and I wish I would have blah,
Right.
right?
Right.
Uh,
Sure.
but they're also learning from me how to parent their kids later, so maybe they'll get it at 2, right? Because my kids are seeing me come to them and be like, "Okay, you're struggling. Let's write down everything you're struggling with." And that's how we started with each kid. It's sort of like, what are the things that are hard? And we write them all down and we start looking like, okay, what does this line up with? Okay, well, and depending on what their answers are, that is which doctor we choose to go see,
Hmm.
right? And then we line up an appointment with a specialist in the area of the places in which the child is struggling, and then ask them for their professional advice. And then they ask more questions, and then we've gotten the ball rolling, and then we get the services that we need, and then the child ends up flourishing, right? This child who is struggling gets the services that they need, and they go from again, being picked last or feeling like they don't fit in, to having friendships, to being a valuable member of their classrooms, and enjoying their life and smiling more and feeling good about themselves.
And what about like, so we're in New York City, so I do think like there's services at the school and stuff here. Maybe I don't know that that's true across the country. Obviously, it's different everywhere. Can both of you speak to that? Like, Rebecca, is there support? I mean, that you would speak to the school about it, or if they're having esteem issues about it, maybe they would get a therapist. But has there been stuff at school that you've talked to, like how can I get my child extra support around this?
So the support system here at the schools that my children go to is not, it does not work with hidden disabilities. The disabilities have to be pretty overt, or you get the services that you need through a doctor, and then you can go to the school with the doctor's opinion. And then it either has to be significant or you have to go through a doctor and then go to the school and say, the doctor says that we need these, particular, changes to how we handle the child. I've also seen where I went to the school without a doctor's thing and said, my son had gotten in trouble and they escalated the situation very quickly. And I was like, hey, I understand that this is your system and the way that you do things. But if you were to give my son like 3 minutes to breathe in the hallway
Hmm.
prior to escalating it any further, I think that would solve your problem. And it did. I've never had another phone call, right? Because they wrote that into, this is how you do that. You give him 3 minutes in the hallway and then you check on him. And then usually he's like, all right, sorry about that.
Right, right. I mean, and that sounds kind of obvious, but I don't know that all parents do it. I mean, Julie, would you add anything to that? Because it sounds like Rebecca went in and advocated for her child, which, like I said, maybe that seems obvious, but I don't know that all parents do that. And how you come at that, how do you communicate? And obviously it depends on the school. But Julie, would you add anything to that in terms of, because we've talked a lot about in this episode about it, how you can attune to the child in the home as yourself as the parent. But I guess as this conversation's going on, I'm kind of wondering where else you can get it. And is there anything else you would add to that in terms of support outside of the house?
Well, what I would say is, there's some parents who are willing to advocate for their child, and there's some parents who are embarrassed to do that because they want a typical kid. And, as Rebecca mentioned before, there is a grief process. I think there's a grief process for me. There was a grief process no matter whether my kids were typical or not, because I had this fantasy baby in my head, that slept all the time and, I don't know, never pooped or whatever, and, whatever my quirky little fantasy was, and that wasn't either of the children that I got. Kids don't sleep. Sleeping like a baby is a misnomer. There is no sleeping with babies, is in my opinion. So I think some parents are willing to advocate. Some people parents are not willing to advocate for their kids, but it's one of the best ways for kids to get the compassion and awareness that they need in a school environment. You mentioned, Greg, that we're in New York City. What I have found in New York City is that, we have private schools and we have public schools. And the private schools, interestingly enough, the public schools, I think, do a fairly good job of providing services for kids, because if they can't serve a kid in their individualness,
Hmm.
then the parents can sue the school system and have their child put in a specialized private school.
Hmm.
So obviously, the public schools don't want that money taken away from them. So I have found that they're pretty accommodating for differences. Interestingly enough, the private school system, while they may say, we have services for kids who have learning disabilities, or we have services for kids with ADHD, you still as have to fall within a very strict measurement of what that is. So if you have multiple hidden disabilities, that school, they don't need your money because they have, 50 kids lined up behind yours. So they don't necessarily accommodate in the same way that a school who might lose their money is going to do. So, all of that boils down to, I think it's important for parents to be able to understand their own child, and understand their own child well, and understand what works. So that means the parents need to have tried things at home, as opposed to just having imaginary things that quote unquote should work. And and then go in and say, this is where this needs to happen. I mean, like Rebecca did, for for her kid.
Yeah, and there's another thing too is if you keep having a child who's breaking a rule consistently over and over, I would assume that something's going on right
Yeah.
there. Because
Hmm.
for me, for instance, I was one of those kids who couldn't stand still in line, but I had POTS, right? And so the blood wasn't getting to my brain. And so, of course, I couldn't stand still. Like, no matter how much I tried, I would have just passed out. Like, so I kept moving,
Sure.
or I would try to move, but I would get in trouble again and again and again and again, and nothing they said would change it because nothing they said could change it. I was
Right.
trying to survive.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, but also, as my brain would be deprived of oxygen, that would affect my behavior once we got back to the classroom as well, because I just had a period where I was forced by my teacher to deprive my own brain of oxygen to follow their rule. And so I would just say that if you have a kid who is breaking a rule and breaking a rule and breaking a rule right in that very spot, you need to seek professional advice, right? Even if it's just like this kid can't ever stand in line. Okay, there could be something significant going on.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And, the other thing that occurred to me was, and I can't remember who first said this, but it's a kind of an overarching philosophy that I think parents should have, which is that kids do well if they can. So if a kid isn't doing well, then we
Mm.
have to say, well, what's preventing that child from doing well? Because nobody gets out of bed in the morning and says, hey, I think I'm going to be an epic failure today. I'm going to get out of bed and break all the rules, and I'm going to harass my classmates, and I'm going to, do poorly on my Nobody gets out of bed and does that, right? Kids want to do well. Human beings want to do well. And if your kid isn't doing well because they can't stand in, as Rebecca said, repetition is so important to pay attention to. If
Hmm.
something keeps happening over and over and over again, if if that's the case, then you know parents need to look at the if they can. Maybe the kid can't do well in that particular thing. And then the question is why? And how can we put supports around that?
Yeah, and what's occurring to me too is like because we always talk about attunement on this show, and I think Rebecca, you've talked about it whether as a parent or hopefully there's an adult in the school, but with a hidden disability, because that's what stuck out to me. What you said, schools can actually, if someone's throwing a temper tantrum and throwing a desk around the room, it might be more easy to be like, oh, okay. So I think more than it sounds to me like the attunement has to be even more heightened. And I loved what you said, this idea of like writing down, what are you struggling with and writing it down? Because I think sometimes that can be a challenge too. You really have to work hard at like what's going on here if it's not super overt necessarily. Like if you just can't stand on line, that's not necessarily as someone who's walking around punching kids in the face or that, you know what I mean? Like the school will react to something that's super overt and like, okay, we understand this, we see this. So I just think that's important to drill down to. That's what I'm kind of getting from this conversation, especially with hidden disabilities that might be a
Mhm.
little more difficult to discern and figure out what's going on.
And to be honest, I think it's something you could do with every child.
And
Like,
you should, yeah.
no
Yeah.
child's walking around like, I'm 100% and can do everything because that's
Yeah.
not reality. And so, what are you struggling with? Let's get you the supports for that. Like that just being a natural part of how you parent. I think that would help with all types of like growth. It's just how this
Yeah.
child needs to grow versus how some other child needs to grow. Every child needs to grow. So writing it down, like what supports you need to be able to help your child grow, I feel like that's just like a step that needs to happen in parenting, just period.
Mhm.
We can wrap up, but we end every episode when we have these sort of expansive conversations about like if a parent is listening to this, and it might be something they're potentially struggling with their child. If there was like one main thing, and I'd love for you both maybe to say, and maybe Julie, we can start with you. There was one main thing that you took away from this conversation to focus on, if you can be two, but if you can say one main thing, what would it be when we're talking about neurodivergent parenting?
Well, here's how I would answer that, Greg, and it's something that we've talked about over and over again. Um, and in our podcast, and I don't think it's something that we explicitly said today, but I urge parents, when there's a struggle, when their kids are struggling or when they're struggling with their kids, to lean in with compassionate curiosity. Lean in with compassionate curiosity. Don't make assumptions. Lean in and be curious. What's going on for you? This is, it seems like you're struggling. This seems hard. Let's
Mm,
talk. That compassionate curiosity will get you further than almost any other technique, I think.
great. Rebecca?
Yeah, and for mine, it's something we also didn't actually talk about today, but we touched on it a bit. So, when you have any child, including one with hidden disabilities, they're going to have their strengths and weaknesses. And what happens with invisible disabilities is people talk so much about the weaknesses, but they don't think about the strengths, because whenever you are sad that your kid is not typical, you're not understanding they have incredible superpowers, right?
Mhm.
What are they doing with their time? Focusing on that.
Mm,
It took me a long time for even myself to realize, like, all of my focus on what I couldn't
mm,
do was depressing. And I did enter a depression. But even as a child, like, focusing on what I couldn't do, that is not the focus. The focus needed to be on what I could do. And honestly, once I started doing that, that's another part of why I started writing too, because I had already discussed with my husband that I wanted to lean into what I could do, and that was writing, before I even had that conversation with my daughter. And that's the key, I think, is to lean into what can they do. And I think that's for every parent.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, what it made me think of is feel like Julie has said this before, but catch them doing it right.
Mhm.
Well, in particular to this, it sounds like celebrating the strengths. But that's what I
Yeah.
thought of, Julie. Having you said that, it's like, because you can get caught up in like what's wrong, what's off, what the struggle is. And Rebecca, you're right. I'm sure, like, even as a parent, if you live there, it can get depressing. And certainly for the kid, if it can be like, when I think of my own child just constantly getting called out, it's really can whack at your self esteem. So, right, Julie, haven't you talked about catching
Uh,
them doing it right?
yes. I'm very forceful about, I believe very strongly in encouragement and catching them doing it right and building on their strengths. Even if what they're doing right is only 1%,
Hmm,
right? And what they're doing wrong is 99%. Focus on the 1%. And that goes back to kids do well if they can. If they know their parents are paying attention all the time, not
hmm,
just to what they're doing wrong, but also to what they're doing right, they're going to want to increase what they're doing right, you know, if they can. So,
hmm.
it all, I think, ties up together. It's so important that this idea of encouragement rather than discouragement.
Great. I think that's a great place to stop. I want to, Rebecca, thanks so much for being here. Again, today our guest is Rebecca Vitsmun, and her book is called Eliza D's Universes. I know it's on Amazon. I'm sure you can get it, in a lot of different places. Rebecca, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
We do.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com, or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
We'll see you next time.